for a welcome to our first Wisdom Night. Monsignor suggested that we invite someone to help us to become more informed as Catholics for the upcoming election. He felt that Monsignor Maniscalo would be a good resource person, as he has worked in Washington with the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, and he wanted to have somebody give us a presentation, a balanced presentation, not endorsing any particular candidate. Monsignor is the pastor of St. Thomas the Apostle in West Hempstead. He was the past editor of the Long Island Catholic, had a lot of jobs in the diocese. He was here in St. Agnes for 18 years, did you say?
Yes, yes.
So I maybe don't have to introduce, but we welcome Monsignor Maniscalo.
I do want to begin very quickly. It's always good to be back at St. Agnes. I lived here 18 years. I was not the parish priest, but I was in residence, and I said Mass every Sunday and on weekdays, and I always loved being in St. Agnes. It was a great place to be, with many happy memories of people down the years. When I still count Monsignor Melton, I would say if we had those most unforgettable character, I had the Night articles, I would certainly put Msgr Melton down in that category. So for many years, many priests down the years, it was a very happy experience, and of course, many of the people I had an opportunity to meet here at St. Agnes. I am aware that it's the debate night, and so I want to get through the talk so that you can all go home and listen to the debate. I approached the debate with I said to my sisters this evening, I would really like at the end of the debate for Jim Laird to get up and say, now let's go to the applause meter, and put his hand over Mr. Romney's head, and put his hand over Mr. Obama's head, and then by the amount of applause say, who is being elected president? a whole more month of campaigning strikes me as getting a little tiring, but that's the American system of government. It's not the same as others, but we, I guess, have gotten used to presidents running for close to 2 years. And I offer my reflections this evening in the context of the bishop's political responsibility statement. If you received at the door two sheets, one's a bulletin insert that has a very good summary of this document, Forming Consciences and Faithful Citizenship. And that is this sheet, although this is color, and the challenges of forming consciences front and back. And on the other side of it, I'll refer to it later in the talk, because I'll actually basically go through that part of the document. And also you have what's called the introductory note. This year, the bishops who chaired the various committees related to the document, instead of revising the document as usually happens every 4 years, they simply put out another document, basically affirming the teaching of forming conscience, the faithful citizenship. By the way, I refer to it as FC squared. Forming conscience and faithful citizenship is a mouthful, so I'll just say FC squared. So the bishops had this introductory note, which is also very good, and on this document it has a very quick summary of the areas in which of concern to the bishops on the back of that page of what's called introductory note. So I offer my reflections in the context of this document. I remember the U.S. bishops for a quarter of a century now have issued these statements, always about a year before the quadrennial elections. And I remember as editor of the Long Island Catholic publishing this statement in full in the paper in 1988. Little did I know then my future would include involvement in developing these statements in 1995, 1999, and 2003. The U.S. bishops approached the issues on the nation's public policy agenda from the perspective of Catholic social teaching, which is a uniquely papal initiative that goes back to Pope Leo XIII's encyclical Rerum Novarum, in which the Pope for the first time addressed the social problems that followed in the wake of industrialization and the development of a capitalistic society with its subsequent conflicts between labor and those who controlled capital. Rerum Novarum is best remembered for its cautious approval of the establishment of associations of working men. While the encyclical strongly defended the right to private property and criticized socialism, it also defended the rights of workers against the excessive greed by employers. The tradition of Catholic social teaching is something that the clergy have had the opportunity to immerse themselves in through their seminary training, and perhaps through a lot of adult education, more recently the laity too. But on the whole, the laity did not get much formation in the Catholic social teaching from the catechism in elementary school or even in high school training. And I once wrote a column in the Long Island Catholic titled "Sleeping Beauties of the Magisterium," that's the church's teaching office. And these sleeping beauties were these encyclicals, which by that time, over almost 100 years, had given a very powerful teaching on social justice. That Catholics are not familiar with these teachings help explain something of a gap that seems to exist at times between the bishops and the Catholic public when it comes to public policy issues. Catholics, like the general public, but perhaps inevitably are more likely to be influenced by the platforms of the political parties dealing with specific public policies than with the principles and more abstract principles of papal social teaching directed to all human beings. Years ago, I received a call from a congressman, a Catholic who was not from Long Island, to complain about the bishop's partisanship in following the lead of the platform of the other party. Now, for a politician who is professionally partisan, calling the bishop's partisan struck me as a pretty good example of the pot calling the kettle black. And I asked the gentleman whether he ever considered whether the other party might be following the lead of the bishops rather than vice versa. His reply indicated to me that he had no concept of the bishops having a social agenda independent of either American political party, an agenda based on religious rather than political concerns. As with most partisans, if you were not with him, you must be shills for the other side. Closer to the truth was a Wall Street Journal writer, Gerald Side, who in a 2001 column cited several of the bishop's policy positions and asked, what ties all these views together? His answer was, America's bishops think it's their responsibility to argue for society's weakest and most vulnerable. And that includes the unborn, the poor, the elderly, immigrants, and those who can't afford fancy lawyers. That kind of social conscience is bound to make almost everybody, including practicing Catholics, squirm from time to time. I think this columnist showed an understanding of the bishop's intentions that is considerably more on target than those who accuse the bishops of partisanship. That's not to say there aren't some Catholics who know what the bishops teach and simply disagree with them. In 1961, Pope John XXIII issued his encyclical on Christianity and Social Project, whose title was Mater et Magistra. The title means mother, that's mater, and teacher, magistra, to which, if I recall rightly, William F. Buckley responded, Mater si, magistra no. The problem that many American politicians on the right have with Catholic social teaching is the positive role it gives to the state. This is not to say that the Church leaves everything up to the state. The Church has a moderate view that was expressed early on in Rerum Novarum, where Leo XIII writes, the working man has interests in which he should be protected by the state. But the Pope also says, when talking about the adjustments that have to be made in different circumstances to ensure a just working relationship between employers and workers, that there should be what he calls societies or boards to make these adjustments to avoid what he refers to as undue interference on the part of the state, which can be appealed to should circumstances require for its sanction and protection. So the state's important, but it's not all important. In many matters, the political left doesn't have a problem with invoking the state. The positive intervention of the state with regard to economic rights is an area in which the left has been supportive of many positions of the Church. The Church and much of the left part company on what are often referred to as the social issues, especially abortion and marriage issues. I think that both the left and the right have in common an excessive individualism. The United States is often said to have a philosophy of rugged individualism. I should add parenthetically that while that may be true, the U.S. is also a nation of joiners. I doubt whether any other country in history has given rise to so many social organizations which seem to have little other reason for existence except for people to get together with one another. So we are a very social nation. But undoubtedly, what we call rugged individualism has had its influence in our social and our political life. A moment ago, I used the term economic rights. Some Americans would challenge that concept. The only economic right should be the ability to promote one's own interests free of government regulation or interference. Margaret Thatcher once famously said, "There is no such thing as society." The Church emphatically replies, "It is not good for the man to be alone," and to the question, "Am I my brother's keeper?" says, "Yes, you are." The left becomes unduly individualistic in matters such as legal abortion and same-sex marriage, as if having children and marriage were only personal matters and not deeply social. In concentrating on the woman and abortion, they ignore the human life that has already begun in conception. With regard to same-sex marriage, the left treats the marriage bond as involving solely issues of personal affection and not as a relationship which is fundamental to the organization of society. So interestingly enough, both the right and the left can get too individualistic and not give enough consideration to the larger social issues. The Church's social teaching rests on the pillars of respect, the respect that needs to be accorded to each individual person, and the realization that the human person is social and realizes their potential through interaction with others. Thus, each person contributes to what is called the common good. And by this social interaction, each person maximizes his or her potential and the potential of society. So it's the individual in society working together to make a good society, working together to create the best atmosphere and environment for the individual to grow. Since Rerum Novarum, the Church has exercised its responsibility to teach on matters of public policy that have a moral dimension to them. And many, very many, do have such a dimension. Also, since Rerum Novarum, unfortunately, some Catholics, many of them politicians, seem to resist the Church's exercise of this responsibility. The reactions of some seem to reflect an attitude that the very fact of becoming a priest or a bishop disqualifies a person from addressing an issue. I remember when I was at the bishops' conference, on one occasion, a bishop had a meeting with a leading member of Congress. He found himself lectured about the issues on which the bishops had issued statements. The congressman mentioned in particular a statement the bishops had issued on agricultural concerns. "What do the bishops know about agriculture?" the congressman asked. When I heard this from the bishop later, I said to him, "You told him, of course." The bishop replied, "No, I was too polite. The fact is, the bishop's parents were farmers." While some religious faiths detach themselves from the world to avoid being sullied, as they see it, by involvement in worldly matters, the Catholic Church considers its responsibility to encompass involvement in this world, and while always emphasizing the primacy of eternal salvation, has put into action Jesus' mandate in the gospel to pursue justice in the present as well as the future. Vatican Council II, in its decree on the pastoral office of bishops in the Church, described the bishop's responsibility as teachers very broadly. This decree urges the bishops to announce the gospel of Christ and also to teach the value of earthly goods and human institutions according to the plan of God the Creator. These include the human person and bodily life, the family and its unity and stability, the procreation and education of children, civil society with its laws and professions, labor and leisure, the arts and technical inventions, poverty and affluence. In addition, the document says, bishops should set forth the ways by which are to be answered the most serious questions concerning the ownership, increase, and just distribution of material goods, peace and war, and brotherly relations among all countries. My own summary of Catholic social teaching is in terms of the virtue of justice. The Church seeks to promote a just society. Justice is indivisible. A society cannot be truly just if it is only just in some ways, while it permits injustice in others. It is this commitment to a thoroughly just society that is what the Wall Street Journal columnist whom I quoted earlier was getting at. And if the bishops show, shall we say, a hesitance about the platforms of both political parties, it's because neither political party really embraces this comprehensive vision of the just society that the bishops have. And it is into this concept of a just society, comprehensively just, that the bishops invite us to involve ourselves creatively, and in which that invitation is given in a particular way in the document Forming Consciences of Faithful Citizenships. And it is particularly appropriate, finally at last, for all of us to be involved, because in the many centuries before democracy emerged as the form of government of most people, the Christian community as a whole could not do much to influence what could be called public policy. As a small persecuted group in the beginning, the only option Christians had was to pray for the kings and those in authority. As St. Paul says, as the church emerged as a powerful force in a monarchical and aristocratic world, it was usually only the hierarchy that had the clout to influence the powers that be. Now, in a democratic era, at last, the large body of Christians can participate in politics. The church, which was not previously enthusiastic about democracy, now acknowledges the justice of the situation. In a document with a rather formidable and forbidding title of Doctrinal Note on some questions regarding participation of Catholics in political life, and we don't help ourselves by giving documents titles like that, let's face it. The Congregation for the Document of Faith states very important things. It says, it is commendable that in today's democratic societies, in a climate of true freedom, everyone is made a participant in directing the body politic. Such societies call for new and fuller forms of participation in public life by Christian and non-Christian citizens alike. Indeed, all can contribute by voting in elections for lawmakers and government officials, and in other ways as well, to the development of political solutions and legislative choices which in their opinion will benefit the common good. And it goes on to say, by fulfilling their civic duties, guided by their Christian consciences, and in conformity with its values, the lay faithful exercise their proper task of infusing the temporal order with Christian values, all the while respecting the nature and rightful autonomy of that order, and cooperating with other citizens according to their particular competence and responsibility. So not only does the Church encourages political involvement on the part of the laity, but also on many occasions has identified the laity as the ones who have the primary responsibility for the Church's presence in the public square, whether that be the marketplace, whether that be the world of entertainment and media, or whether that be the world of politics. So Forming Consciences of Faithful Citizenship is a document written to encourage the laity to exercise this responsibility, which we now can effectively exercise because of democratic structures, and to do so always in keeping with a well-formed Christian conscience. And the principles of Catholic social teaching that it highlights, you can find on the back page of the formation for the challenges of forming conscience of faith. On the back page of that document, you will see a heading in the bottom of or the middle of the right-hand column. What does the Church say about Catholic social teaching in the public square? 7 key themes. And I'll go through these themes. I'll add a little bit more detail to what is there, but these are very good summaries of what the bishops are telling us on the principles of Catholic social teaching. So first of all, the right to life and the dignity of the human person. Human life is sacred. The dignity of the human person is the fountain of a moral vision for society. Direct attacks on innocent persons are never morally acceptable at any stage or in any condition. These threats to the sanctity of human life include abortion, euthanasia, human cloning, and the destruction of human embryos for research. Catholic teaching about the dignity of life calls us to oppose torture, unjust war, and the use of the death penalty, to prevent genocide and attacks against non-combatants, to oppose racism, and to overcome poverty and suffering. Secondly, call to family, community, and participation. The human person is not only sacred, but also social. Full human development takes place in relationship with others. The family, based on marriage between a man and a woman, is the first and fundamental unity of society, and is a sanctuary for the creation and nurturing of children. It should be defended and strengthened, not redefined or undermined by permitting same-sex unions or other distortions of marriage. How we organize our society directly affects the common good and the capacity of individuals to develop their full potential. Every person in association has a right and a duty to participate actively in shaping society.
The principle of subsidiarity reminds us that larger institutions in society should not overwhelm or interfere with smaller or local institutions, yet larger institutions have essential responsibilities when more local institutions cannot adequately protect human dignity, meet human need, and advance the common good. A good example of that was the whole civil rights campaign. Clearly, the federal government had to take this on because there were states who simply would not take on responsibility for assuring the rights of the citizens of different colors. So sometimes subsidiarity basically says handle things at the nearest level, the lowest level they can be handled at, but that does not take away the fact that sometimes it's the highest level that is the one that's going to have to deal with problems. Rights and responsibilities. Human dignity is respected and the common good is fostered only if human rights are protected, and basic responsibilities are that every human being has a right to life, the fundamental right that makes all of the rights possible, and the right to access to those things required for human decency, food and shelter, education and employment, health care and housing, freedom of religion and family life. The right to exercise religious freedom publicly and privately, it needs to be constantly defended, and corresponding to these rights are duties and responsibilities to one another, to our families, to the larger society. Rights should be understood and exercised in a moral framework rooted in the dignity of the human person. Option for the poor and vulnerable. While the common good embraces all, those who are weak, vulnerable, and most in need deserve preferential concern. A basic moral test for our society is how we treat the most vulnerable in our midst. In a society marred by deepening disparities between the rich and poor, Scripture gives the story of the Last Judgment and reminds us that we will be judged by response to the least among us. We all know that. And Jesus says the king will come and he will divide the nations into two, the sheep and the goats, and he will say to one, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me drink. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was sick or in prison, you gave me and you gave me comfort. And the righteous will say, when did we see you in these conditions? And the king will answer, when you did it for the least ones, you did it for me. And so Jesus himself gives us the care for the least in society as a primary responsibility if we truly want to enter into this fullness of life and salvation and to be like God, who cares for those who have little. This prevention operation for the poor and vulnerable includes all who are marginalized in society and beyond: unborn children, persons with disabilities, the elderly, the terminally ill, victims of injustice and oppression, as well as those who are poor and in need. The dignity of work and the rights of workers. As I said, it's in a sense poetic justice that the first great social encyclical has to do with the working man, because the church reveres labor. The human person is called to work. No problem with retiring ultimately after a lifetime of work, but basically work is something that dignifies a person, and the person who works should be treated with dignity, so that the economy must serve people, not the other way around. Work is more than a way to make a living. It is forming and continuing participation in God's creation. Employers contribute to the common good through the services or products they provide, and by creating jobs that uphold the dignity and rights of workers, to productive work, to decent wages, to adequate benefits and security in their old age, to the choice of whether to organize and join unions, the opportunity for legal status for immigrant workers, to private property, and to economic initiative. Workers have responsibilities to provide a fair day's work for a fair day's pay, to treat employees and co-workers with respect, and to carry out their work in ways that contribute to the common good. And there is a concept also called solidarity, and that means that word refers to, of course, it became famous because of the union in Poland during the rise against communism, but it means more generally we are one human family, whatever our national, racial, ethnic, economic, and ideological differences are. We are brothers and sisters keepers wherever they may be. Loving our neighbor has global dimensions and requires us to eradicate racism and address the extreme poverty and disease plaguing so much of the world, to welcome the stranger among us, including immigrants seeking work, a safe home, education for their children, and decent life for their families, to promote peace and pursue justice in a world marred by terrible violence and conflict. Decisions on the use of force should be guided by traditional moral criteria and undertaken only as a last resort. And finally, caring for God's creation. We show respect for the Creator by our stewardship of God's creation, care for the urges and beauty of our faith, and a sign of our concern for all people. We should strive to live simply, to protect the planet, to respect God's creation. So when I talk about the Catholic social teaching as aimed at promoting a just society, a society that is comprehensively just, we can see that in all these individual issues that the bishops raise in the course of their document, Forming Conscience for Faithful Citizenship. It is a comprehensive vision of a just society for which we should be working together. In offering these principles on which Catholics are urged to cast their votes according to an informed Christian conscience, the bishops do so in a nonpartisan way. It is up to the Catholic voter to decide what choices are dictated by his or her informed conscience. The Catholic voter is also reminded that not all issues in a political campaign are of equal weight, and certain issues that involve what are called intrinsic evils, such as abortion, are paramount. A Catholic would contradict an essential moral teaching if he or she were to vote for a candidate who takes a position in favor of an intrinsic evil, such as abortion or racism, if the voter's intent is to support that position. In other words, if precisely you're saying, well, I'm going to cast this vote because I support abortion or I support racism, obviously your own Catholic commitment to the social teaching in the Church is lacking. The bishop's concerns have always been with policies and principles, not parties or personalities. During my time in Washington, both parties held the White House and Congress. The Bishops' Conference's public policy staff was concerned to promote the bishops' public policy positions irrespective of which party was in power, and was able to influence actually the government under both situations. The statements of the Catholic bishops, the Catholic hierarchy from 1792 to 1997 have been gathered into a multi-volume work published by the Bishops' Conference, which demonstrate the wide spectrum of issues with which the bishops have dealt throughout U.S. history. The volumes also make clear that the bishops were present in the public policy arena not as politicians or even as statesmen, but as moral teachers in recommending specific policy choices that were not mimicking either party's political platform, but following through on the implications of the Church's social justice teaching. American political life has often been characterized by a high degree of partisanship, with non-partisanship being a concept seemingly beyond the reach of many politically engaged Americans. I got a lesson in this, in the in the power of partisanship, in 1992, when Justice Antonin Scalia accepted an invitation to be the guest speaker at the dinner celebrating the Long Island Catholic's 30th anniversary. That year there was an unusual event here within our Republican Party on Long Island. A congressman decided not to seek re-election, and the candidate anointed by the party chairman to succeed him was challenged in a primary. You know, there have not been lots of primaries in Nassau County over the years. The challenge was defeated, but the September primary left bitter feelings. I went to the office, right about this time, the beginning of October, I went to the office of the judge who was chairing the dinner to go over the seating arrangement. His original plan was in tatters. The primary challenge was so divisive, he told me, that partners in law firms who had worked together for years were hardly speaking to one another. They couldn't be seated together. And this was inside one party. So while this incident might be too small on which a foundation to build a whole political philosophy, it has remained with me as an example of the forceful impact of partisanship stirred up by electoral politics. The bishops need to avoid this kind of partisanship if they are to have any chance of communicating why their public policy positions are for the common good. In addition, they also have a duty not only to acknowledge the support of those who already agree with the Church's moral principles, but are also obliged to try to persuade those who have not yet agreed with them. Their chance of doing so would be nil if the bishops were perceived as working one side of the political street. Another reason for not casting one's lot with specific political parties and politicians is that simply both can be quite relaxed about their principles and will change their principles sometimes in the race for victory. Associating themselves with the electoral fate of a political party risks lowering the bishops and their social teaching from the realm of moral authority to that of special interest lobbying. Since the platforms of the two predominant parties might promote justice in some areas, but fail to do so in others, the challenge is to support or oppose what deserves support or opposition without appearing to be co-opted by either or by any other political entity. And that's the bishops. And also we know that nonpartisanship is required by the law, by the federal taxes, as the bishops are considered charitable organizations. Charitable organizations are not allowed to support or oppose candidates in a political race, but I think the bishops, while that may be true, I think the bishops accept that because of the prudential reasons that I've just mentioned, that they ought to be centers of unity and that they ought to be people who try to persuade all of society that what they teach as what creates a just society, they need to persuade everybody of that. And once you kind of get caught into the situation of being perceived as being on the side of one party or another, especially during election time, then it's very hard to be seen as speaking. I mean, I've just had this over and over again. Why are the bishops for so? Why are the bishops for so and so? I mean, quite frankly, the bishops are against abortion. If a candidate was for abortion, whether it was Republican or Democrat, they would be against that candidate. It's not based on being a Republican or Democrat. You know, the Presbyterian Church used to be called the Republican Party of Prayer. Well, that's happened to the bishops too. Sometimes they're called the Republican Party of Prayer. Sometimes they're called the Democratic Party of Prayer. That was very funny in the conference. I heard both. Why are the bishops so Republican? Why are they so Democratic? And I guess they were doing something right. So the bishops are sometimes criticized for prizing the tax exemption over taking a prophetic stand on some social issues. However, the record shows this has not been the case. Either during the 1980s, when the conference developed the extensive pastoral letters on the challenge of peace and economic justice for all, that were not popular with the Reagan administration in power at the time, or during the decades extending back even before Roe v. Wade, during which the bishop had consistently been the vocal opponents of the legalization of abortion. People forget that when Roe v. Wade was first issued, the Southern Baptist Convention supported it. The only organized group in this country that opposed Roe v. Wade and said it had to be turned aside were the Catholic bishops. And if they hadn't done it at the time, it might very well have been accepted throughout society. But they were the ones who said, no, this cannot happen, and eventually others came around to their point of view, especially in the religious community. However, while the bishops are nonpartisan by prudence and regulation, the individual Catholic layperson is not only allowed, but encouraged actively to participate in the nation's political life, including its electoral processes. So I urge you to read Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenship in its entirety as an authoritative guide to such involvement. So the bishops have to worry about these things, the clergy preaching for polos have to worry about these things, but the laity should be actively engaged. They should be actively engaged in the whole spectrum of political thought. There's no problem being a Republican, there's no problem being a Democrat. We should be trying to influence both major parties towards the comprehensive vision of justice that is presented in Catholic social teaching. And so there's no problem with partisanship on the part of the laity, as long as, ultimately, that partisanship is based on an informed Christian conscience, an informed conscience that does not simply blindly accept one's own party political platform, but judges that platform by the standards that have been presented in the Church of Social Teaching, and tries their best to get their party of choice, their candidate of choice, to conform themselves or himself or herself to what we truly believe will produce a truly just society comprehensively in all areas and aspects of life. So as we come to this time of election, it's important to look at all the issues. It's important to look at issues that are, and as I said, some issues are more important than others. That needs to be taken into account. But we should be actively engaged, actively studying the issues we need to know about, and to inform our politicians that we expect them to accomplish something. We expect of our politicians that indeed they do promote a just society. We know that it's beyond our capacity, our finite capacity, to achieve that. I mean, the kingdom of heaven is only going to come when Jesus himself returns in glory. So if we fall short of it, that's just part of the human situation. But we should be working toward it. We should have a dynamism which is driving us towards making our society as just as possible. A society which respects the dignity of each and every human being. A society in which each and every human being is encouraged to participate in society and to promote the common and to contribute to the common good. And that our political leaders should be people who promote respect for that dignity of every person and promote the common good and who work for this. And I think the Catholics who are active in the political sphere have the greatest gift to give to our society by bringing to our politicians this comprehensive vision of justice, this comprehensive vision of a society in which every human being is respected, including the unborn, and including the poor and the vulnerable, including those who are ill
and dying, include those who are old, to really have respect for the entire span of our nation. I mean, we obviously the middle class in our country is the largest group of people. In other countries, the poor class is the largest group of people. One can understand why politicians want to make an appeal to the middle class. But there are tremendous numbers of poor in the country, and it's a growing number of people. And it would be a tremendous benefit to our society if our politicians would say, how are we going to organize ourselves together to respond to those who can't help themselves? How are we going to make our society better in that way? And of course, in a world in which healthcare is a tremendous issue, and people are living longer and longer, or living into periods of life when they are going to face major illnesses and are going to not be able to take care of themselves. You know, there's that wonderful line from Kavanaugh Hachanoof. You can be young without money, but you can't be old without money. And there's the truth to that. But our society can make that less of an issue by organizing itself to create a just situation in which those who can no longer support themselves, or which their resources no longer are able to help them in an expanding age, as life expectancy expands, to make sure that they are treated with dignity, as much dignity in their older years as they were when they were able to actively work and support themselves. So you are encouraged to be active in our world, in politics, but always in whichever party you think is the one that you think is most likely to promote justice. But always remember, the thing that a Catholic can bring to any political party is this wonderful vision of a comprehensively just society, and that by not taking on the platform of the party, but rather challenging every party with this tremendous vision that is given in Catholic social teaching, to make our political life more wholesome, to make our political life more focused, and to make our political life more successful in achieving the just society which our Catholic social teaching presents to us as the goal we should be trying to reach. Thank you very much.